Anyway, we're on DAF Gimel Amud Aleph. Amar Rabbi Tanchum is where we're up to, right? Almost down to the middle of the Amud. We went a little bit past. Amar Rabbi Tanchum, Cheresh ba'azno echas pater min ha're'iyah. That if a person is deaf in one ear, then he's also pater from doing the mitzvah of re'iyah, the pilgrimage and the olas re'iyah. Shene'amar be'oznehem. Because when the Torah talks about the mitzvah of hakel, it says when all of the Jewish people come, in the place which God shall choose, Tikra es haTorah hazos, you shall read this Torah, neged kol Yisrael be'oznehem, in the presence of all of Israel in their ears. Boker tov, sabach il-khir, keifan hal. So, neged kol Yisrael be'oznehem, in front of all of Israel, in their ears. So this word in their ears is completely superfluous. And therefore it's coming to teach that the people who are subject to the mitzvah of hakel have to be able to hear the Torah with both ears, in stereo, right? If they can only hear in one ear, so then you're pater from the mitzvah of hakel. And because of the Gzeira Shava that we saw yesterday, that connects the mitzvah of hakel to the mitzvah of aliyah l'regel, once you're pater from hakel, you're also pater from the mitzvah of re'iyah, which is this pilgrimage, right? So the Gemara says, but wait a minute, we need the word be'oznehem, in their ears, to teach me that the Jewish people have to be present to hear the reading of the Torah. Isn't that what the pasuk is telling you? So the Gemara says, no, hahu mineged kol Yisrael nafka. You don't need the word be'oznehem, since the Torah already says that it's in the presence of all the Jewish people, then they're listening. But the Gemara says, but wait a minute, imi neged kol Yisrael havamina afal gavdelo shami kasav rachmana be'oznehem v'hu deshami. But wait a minute, if I only had the words in the presence of all of Israel, and I didn't say be'oznehem, I might have thought that even if the king reads the Torah in the presence of all of the population, but he's not audible enough, he's not loud enough for people to hear him, maybe that's sufficient. And therefore the Torah says, no, he has to be loud enough so that everyone can hear it with their ears. Maybe that's what the pasuk is telling me. Hahu milaman yishma'u nafka. No, but you don't need the word be'oznehem for that, because in the next pasuk it says, Laman Yishmu, so that they can hear, like we learned that pasuk yesterday. So if the Torah already says Laman Yishmu, that it's necessary for them to hear, why do you need the word be'oznehem? So therefore, ergo, we learn from here that the word be'oznehem means they have to hear with both ears, and if a person can only hear with one ear, he's pater from the mitzvah. And the same thing is true with the mitzvah of re'iyah. Now, Amar Rabbi Tanchum, now we have another psak of Rabbi Tanchum, which is Chiger beraglo echas pater min ha're'iyah. That if a person is handicapped in only one leg, one leg is completely healthy, the other leg is broken, let's say, he's got a cast on it or whatever, he too is pater from the mitzvah of re'iyah. Shene'amar regalim. As the Torah says, shalosh regalim, that there are three, regalim is written in the plural, right? Since it's not written in the singular, it's written in the plural, it means that both legs have to be fully functional.
But when he says shalosh, he has to put regalim in plural.
Right. It's a good question, but nevertheless, it could have said shalosh chagim, or shalosh, right? Shalosh mikra'ei kodesh, right? So the fact that it calls it regalim is teaching me both. Number one, that there are 3 holidays, and number 2, that you have to use both feet, healthy feet, in order to make aliyah l'regel. But one second, the Gemara says, but one second, what about, there's another halacha, maybe that we need the word regalim for, which tells me that if a person is an amputee, right, then he's pater from the mitzvah of re'iyah. Maybe that's what the Torah is telling you, that you have to have feet. But maybe if you have a foot and it's not usable right now, maybe that's not what the Torah is addressing. Maybe it's just telling me that you can't be an amputee. Maybe that's what the word regalim is teaching me. Who's that guy that just murdered his girlfriend in South Africa? What's his name?
Pretorius.
The runner. Right, Pretorius. So he can run faster to Yerushalayim than most of us can, right? But because he doesn't have feet, he would be pater. I think the verdict is today. I think that it's coming down today. Anyway, so the Gemara says, no. Hahu mi pe'amim nafka. There's another pasuk that says, Shalosh pe'amim bashana yera'eh kol zechurecha, that 3 times a year. Now the word pe'amim means footsteps. because even though it means 3 times, it also, the word pe'amim also means footsteps. So from that pasuk I know that you have to have actually feet. So therefore the word regalim teaches me that even when you have feet, but you need to be able to use both of them in a healthy way in order to be chayiv in the mitzvah. Detanya, pe'amim. Ein pe'amim ela regalim. As the Brisa says, that the word pe'amim means footsteps. V'chein hu omer, tirmesena regel raglei oni pa'amei dalim. That the foot of the poor will trample on the footsteps of the lowly. Okay, so whatever that pasuk means, but you see that the word pa'amei is referring to footsteps. V'omer ma'yafu fe'amayich bane olim bas nadiv. And further it says in Shir HaShirim, how beautiful are your footsteps in the shoes, O daughter of benevolent one. Nadiv is a benevolent or an aristocrat or a benevolent person. So Darash Rava. So anyway, so that's where we know that you have to be healthy in both legs to be chayiv in the mitzvah. Now let's look at some agadata based on that latter pasuk. Mai dichsiv mayafu fe'amayich bane olim bas nadiv. What does the pasuk mean when it says, how beautiful are your footsteps in the shoes, O daughter of the benevolent? Kama noin raglein shel Yisrael b'shah sha'olin l'regel. How beautiful are the footsteps or are the feet of the Jewish people when they make a pilgrimage to Yerushalayim during the Yontif. Bas Nadiv, what does Bas Nadiv mean? The daughter of the benevolent. Bito shel Avram Avinu, shenikra Nadiv, the daughter of Avraham, who was known as the Nadiv, as the benefactor or the benevolent one. Shene'emar, Nedivei Amim Ne'esafu Am Elokei Avraham. That it says that the Nedivei Amim, the princes or the benefactors of the nations, gathered together with the nation of the God of Abraham. Now, why are the Jewish people called the God of Abraham? Elokei Avraham v'lo Elokei Yitzchak v'Yaakov. Why not the God of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? Why only the God of Avraham? Ela Elokei Avraham shahaya techila legerim. The reason why is because we're talking about Nedivei Amim, people who, of their own volition, decide to attach themselves to the Jewish people. So who was the first person who, of his own volition, without any ancestry, without any impetus from his ancestors, came forward? That's what the word Nadiv means, a volunteer. Someone who comes forth without any previous heritage and comes forth and commits themselves to Hashem. That's Avraham Avinu. He's the Techila Lagem, he's the first convert. And therefore, since the Pasuk is talking about Nedivei Amim, people of the other nations who want to attach themselves to the Jewish people, they are also like Avraham. Amar of Kahana, Darash Rav Nasan bar Minyumi mishum Rabbi Tanchum. Now the question, of course, is why does this pasuk also allude to the Shalosh Regalim? What does the benefaction, being a benefactor, being a volunteer, have to do with making Aliyah L'Regel? So that's something that to be analyzed. We won't go into that today. But in any event, another thing that was said in the name of Rabbi Tanchum is as follows: Mai dichsiv v'habor reik ein bo mayim, mimashma shenemar v'habor reik ein yodeya she'ein bo mayim. Another drasha from the pasuk when it says when they threw Yosef in the pit, the very famous medrash which is quoted by Rashi, it says that the pit was empty. There was no water in the pit. So I don't understand. If you already told me the pit is empty, obviously there's no water in it. So elamayim ein bo aval nachashim v'akrabim yesh bo. But that teaches me that there was no water. There was nothing positive in the pit. But there was a lot of negativity in the pit. There were snakes and scorpions. And many of the Meforshim understand that this is not just telling me physically and historically what was in the pit of Yosef, but it's also teaching me a principle that nature abhors a vacuum. So when something is empty and it's voided of anything positive, then negativity automatically sets in. And if there's no water, if there's no Torah in the pit, if there's no Torah, which is the water of every person's insides, then eventually Nechashim and Akrabim, the snakes and the scorpions, will creep in. Tana Rabbanan, Ma'aseh Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka v'Rebbe Elazar bar Chasma, shahalchu lahakbil pnei or Rebbe Elazar Chasma. It's not clear what the correct. Maybe it's Rebbe Elazar Chasma. Chisma. Shahalchu lahakbil pnei Rabbi Yeshua b'Pikiyin. These two great sages, this is in the Tanaitic era, they go to make Aliyah L'Regel. They go during the times when there's no Beis HaMikdash. Instead of going to make a pilgrimage to Yerushalayim, there's a mitzvah to make a pilgrimage to your Rebbe. So they were going to make a pilgrimage to be with their Rebbe over the Chag. And so they go to the great Rabbi Yehoshua in the town of Pekin. Amar lahem ma chidush haya bebeis hamedrash hayom. So Rabbi Yehoshua asked them, so what novelty did you learn in the base Medrash today? Tell me what you learned in the base Medrash, something new. Amrulo talmidecha anu umeimecha anu shosim. So they said, Rabbi, come on, we're your students. We should be listening to you, not telling you something that we learned. So, like we drink from your waters, you don't have to drink from our waters. Amar lahem afal pichein iyavshar lebeis hamedrash below chiddush. He says, no. Nonetheless, even though it's true, I'm your Rebbe, but obviously there's always a chiddush. There's always some novelty that you can learn from something that's said in the base medrash. I want you to tell me. He insisted. So Shabbos shel mi haisa. So he asked them, whose shift was it? Whose week was it? Now, what does this refer to? This was at a time in Jewish history when there were two Nesiim who alternated roles. Remember the story about how Rabbi Gamliel insulted Rabbi Yehoshua, and as a result, they demoted Rabbi Gamliel from being the Nasi, and they appointed Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Gamliel was able to get mechila from Rabbi Yehoshua. He did a tshuva, he humbled himself, and as a result, they reinstated Rabbi Gamliel. But they couldn't demote Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He didn't do anything wrong. So they had alternating weeks in the base medrash in the yeshiva, where 1 week it was Rabbi Gamliel was the Rosh Yeshiva, 1 week Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was the Rosh Yeshiva. So that's why he said Shabbos shel mi haisa. Whose week was it? So they told him Shabbos shel Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah haisa. They told him it was Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's week. Uvameh haisa haggadah hayom. So what agadah did he teach you today? So Amru lo beparshas Hakel. He was teaching us about the mitzvah of Hakel. Uma darash ba. So what did he say? Hakel es ha'am ha'anashim v'anashim v'hataf. It says in the Torah, gather the whole nation, men, women, and children. Im anashim ba'am lilmod, nashim ba'as lishmoa. So I can understand why men and women have to come. Men have to come because they have a mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Women come not because they have a mitzvah of Talmud Torah, because women are exempt from the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, but they still have to know what mitzvahs they have to do to perform, so that there's a benefit for them to hear portions of the Torah that address women's commandments. But taf lamaboyin. But why do you have to bring your children? The children are patur from mitzvahs. They're not even reaching the age of chinuch. So the Gemara answers, Kedei litein sachar lemiviehem, to give a reward to those who bring them. There's a lot of Torah on this, obviously, and it's, I think, in this, is it this week's parsha, or what's this week's parsha? It's on Vayelech. Oh, it's in Vayelech. So we have this week is Nitzavim. I'm sorry. I'm ahead of myself. So it's a week from the Shabbos. We'll read about it. So you'll look in the Rashi and you'll see there's a whole bunch of Torah on this whole Gemara as far as why we bring our children, to give a reward to those who bring them. In other words, and Tosfos points out, from here is the minhag to bring small children to shul to daven with you, so that they should become enveloped by this environment of Torah and Tefillah. So Amar Lahem, Margolis.
There's been conversation between Elazar ben Azariah and Talmidim or Shimon ben Gamliel?
This was taught by Rabbi Elazar. The students are telling him to Rabbi. No, they're telling Rabbi Yehoshua what they learned from Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah in the base medrash. Okay, it was his week. Okay, so Amar Lahem, Margolis Tova Haisa Biyetchem Ubikashem LaAbda Mimeni. So Rabbi Yehoshua says to them, a geshmaka devar Torah like that. It was pearls of wisdom like that you wanted to hide from me, right? In other words, I had to force it out of you. So va'od dorash, and then they continue and they said, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah continued and he said, Es Hashem he'amarta hayom v'Hashem he'mircha hayom. This is in this week's parsha in Kisava, that it says. Now there are many different ways of translating the word he'amarta. Some say that it's God has chosen you, and you have chosen God. But Rashi says no, it's that God, you have praised, Es Hashem he'amarta, you have praised God, and God has praised you. Now, how have you praised God and God has praised you? Amar lehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu liYisrael, Atem asisuni chativa echas ba'olam, va'ani e'eseh eschem chativa echas ba'olam. That you, the Jewish people, have made me into one unique and unitary entity in this world, and I will therefore make you a unique and unitary entity in the world as well. By your declaration, which we've taught the entire world, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, the world has learned that God is unique and unitary. And therefore, I will therefore make you unitary by saying in the pasuk Umika Amcha Yisrael in Divrei Hayamim, who is like you, O nation Israel, Goy Echad Ba'aretz, one nation in the world, and the world now recognizes that there is no one like the Jewish nation. Amazing Tosfos at the top of the Yom that I have to share with you. Tosfos observes that Shabbos Mincha, we say, Ata Echad, V'Shimcha Echad, Umika Amcha Yisrael Goy Echad Ba'aretz. What in the world does that have to do with Shabbos? In Friday night, we say Vayechulu. That's got to do with Shabbos. God rests on the seventh day. Shabbos morning, we say Yismach Moshe, because Kilil Tiferes Nasatelo B'Yamdol Lefanach Al Har Sinai, that Moshe received the Torah on Shabbos, on the 7th of Sivan, right? But what does Ato Echad V'Shimcha Echad have to do with Shabbos? So he quotes from the Medrash. He says that there are three entities that are unitary and unique, and each one out of this, like a triangle, two out of the three are always testifying about the third one's uniqueness. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael testify about the uniqueness of Shabbos because we always rest on Shabbos just like Hashem rests on Shabbos. HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Shabbos testify about the uniqueness of Klal Yisrael because Hashem says Umika Amcha Yisrael, and Shabbos sort of envelops the Jewish people, and the Jewish people and Shabbos testify about the uniqueness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And therefore, because Shabbos is part of this trifecta, this group of three, we include this statement in Mincha at Shabbos afternoon. So it's something for you to remember. All right, V'dorash. Then he further expounded, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He said, Divrei Chachamim kedarevonos uchemismeros netuim ba'alei asufos nitnu mero echad. This is a pasuk in Koheles. It says the words of the sages are like cattle prods, and they're like nails that have been nailed into the wall. Ba'alei are planted by the people who have gathered in, given from one shepherd. So what does this pasuk mean? Lama nimshul divrei Torah ledarvan. Why the words of Torah compared to a cattle prod? Lomar lecha ma darvan zeh mechavenes hapar litlameh lo hotzi chaim laolam. Af divrei Torah mechavenes lomdin midarchei misa ledarchei chaim. It's to teach you as follows: that just like you need a cattle prod to guide the bull or the cow that's pulling the plow along the row in the furrow in the field, so that we can bring life to the world by making sure that the field is properly plowed and the produce grows properly, so too Torah is like that cattle prod, in that it guides the Jewish people on the proper path to take us away from death and bring us to life. So imadarvan zeh mitaltel af divrei Torah mitaltelin. But then if you think that the Torah is only compared to a cattle prod is something that's movable from place to place, so maybe the Torah can be removed from the individual. Just as easily as I acquire it, I can throw it somewhere else. Talmulomar mismeros. No, then the Torah is compared to a nail. Like a nail, when you bang it into the wall, it stays well adhered to the wall. You can't pull it out anymore. So that's the same thing, that when the Torah is embedded within a person, it doesn't leave. Imam mismar zeh chaser v'lo yaser af divrei Torah chaserin v'lo yaserin. But wait a minute, and this is where the Marshal learns. He says, but when you bang a hole in the wall with a nail, you've created a deficiency, a hole in the wall. So maybe when Torah enters into a person, it creates a deficiency within the person, and not a proficiency, but a deficiency. So Talmud Omar nituim. So therefore, the Torah then has to be compared to a plant, something organic. Manatiyazu para v'rava, af divrei Torah parin v'ravin. And therefore, Torah is something that when you put it into you, it doesn't create an abscess, but it creates rather something that flourishes and grows and causes you to grow as a result. And then ba'alei asufos. What does it mean that the people who are gathered in? Elu talmidei chachamim sheyoshven asufos va'oskin b'Torah. This refers to talmidei chachamim who sit and gather in groups to study different areas of Torah. Halalu mitamin v'halalu mitaharin, halalu osrin v'halalu matirin, halalu posim v'halalu machshirin. So asufos means that they're in separate groups. Some groups say tameh, some say tohar, some say asr, some say mutter, some say pasul, some say kosher. You have all of these debates within Torah, but that's part of the Torah process. So Shema Yomer Adam Heichani Lomei Torah Me'ata. So a person may say, well, then how can I know what is right? How can I know how to learn Torah properly if there's all this controversy, if there's all of this discord and disagreement? So Talmud Omar, and therefore the pasuk says Nitenu Me'ro'eh Echad, that the Torah was all given from one shepherd. That what? Kulam Nitnu Meiroa Echad, that they were all given from the same shepherd, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that despite the fact that you have disagreements within Torah, it's like Elu ve'elu, Divrei Elokim Chaim. Even when there's a disagreement, both sides are emanating from the Torah of Hashem. Kel Echad Nasnan, that one God gave them to us, gave the Torah to us, and Parnas Echad Amran, and one provider, meaning referring, I believe, to Moshe Rabbeinu, that, right? And mipi adon kolamasim baruchu, and it is from the mouth of the master of he who created all that Moshe was able to bring this Torah down to us. So, as it says that Hashem spoke all of these words. So therefore, afata, since now that you understand that even when there are disagreements, all of these things emanate ultimately from the unitary source of Hashem, asei oznecha ke'afar cheses, and you should make your ears like a big funnel, and acquire for yourself a discerning heart. Lishmo es divrei mitamim es divrei mitaharim es divrei osm es divrei matirim es divrei posm es divrei machshirin. And therefore you should accept and be able to discern and learn how to listen to both sides, both arguments, both the arguments of those who say Tohar and Tameh, those who say Asr and say Mutter, and those who say Pasal and say Kasher, because both sides have validity. Even though ultimately the halacha has to be paskin like one, but nevertheless the other side has merit and you have to understand it as well, because it's all part of Torah. So that's the conclusion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's teachings that these two Tanoim students are repeating over to Rabbi Yehoshua.
Two sides of every story.
There's two sides to every story. And B'lashon hazeh amar lahem, and so Rabbi Yeshua then said exactly like this to them. He said, Ein dor yasam she Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah shari b'socho, that this generation is not an orphan because Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is in our midst. And as long as we have Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, we know that we'll be okay. So he was just like so grateful to hear the teachings of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Remember, Rabbi Yeshua is an elder statesman now. He's an older man. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is a young guy. But he says, Baruch Hashem, he's a young man, but he's able to retain and the Torah for the next generation. So now the Gemara says, V'leim rulei beheja. So now that we've concluded this story, why is it that these two students, when Rabbi Yeshua asked them what was studied in the Beis Medrash today, why did they just say outright, okay, Rebbe, this is what we learned? Why did they have to demur and say, Rebbe, no, we only drink from your water? Like, why did they have to go through this whole procedure? The answer is because we're going to see a story about a student who was asked the very same question, and he did not demur. He did not decline originally, and his Rebbe got upset with him for sort of almost slighting the honor of the Rebbe by giving in glowing terms what he had learned in the Beis Medrash, like almost implying that I got more out of the Beis Medrash than I got out of you. So therefore it's Detanya, Maisa b'Rebbe Yossi ben Durmaskis, Shahalach lahap kabil pnei Rebbe Eliezer belod. This is the story. Rabbi Yossi goes to greet his Rebbe Eliezer on Yantif in the town of Lod, and Amrlo machidush hayu bebeis hamedrash hayom. So he asked him, okay, tell me, what did you learn new in the Beis Medrash today? Amrle nimnu v'gamru Amon umoav ma'asrin ma'aser ani bashvias. And he said, you know what I learned in the Beis Medrash today? Like, he didn't hesitate. He said, I learned in the Beis Medrash today a chiddush, an amazing thing, that the territories of Ammon and Moab on the Transjordan, on the eastern side of the Jordan, are not part of Eretz, do not have the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, on a Shemitah year, the laws of Shemitah do not apply to that land. And the rabbis therefore decreed that you have to tithe from it in order to make sure that the poor are provided for during the Shemitah year. So Amar lo Yossi, pshot yodecha v'kabel einecha. So he said sternly to him, Yossi, stick out your hands so you can catch your eyes. Meaning he was about to curse him that his eyeballs would fall out of their sockets and he'd have to catch them. So pashat yada v'kibel einav. And that's exactly what happened. He stuck out his hand, his eyeballs popped out, and now he was holding his eyes in his hands. Now, I don't know, it sounds a bit incredible to me that this is to be taken literally. I could be wrong. but I believe that this is to be taken as a metaphor. But who knows? So anyway, Bacha Rabbi Eliezer va'omar. Rabbi Eliezer then cried and he said, Sod Hashem liyareya avuvrisav lahodiyam. Oh, he said, woe is me. He says, the secret of God is only to those who fear Him. Pasuk in Tehillim, which basically implies, you are not privy to the great secrets of the world, my student Rabbi Yossi, because you're not as God-fearing as you ought to be. Amar lo lechem or lahem. And he said to his student, you know what? Those people who you so admire in the Beis Medrash, who you think gave such an amazing chiddush, it's not so amazing. Go back and tell them, Al tachushu leminyanechem kach mekublani Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He says, don't be so concerned about the consensus that you came to today in the Beis Medrash, that Ammon and Moab do not have Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. That's not such a big deal. We already knew that generations ago. He says, I have a tradition from Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Sheshama Meirabo, who heard from his Rebbe, Verabo Meirabo, and his Rebbe from his Rebbe, and Hilchas Ela Moshe Misinai, that this goes back all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. That Ammon and Moab Ma'asrin Meister Ani Bashvias. That they are subject to tithes during the Shemitah year because they don't have Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. Matam, what's the reason? The reason is as follows. This was already foretold by Moshe. Harbe krachim kavshu ola Mitzrayim v'lo kavshum ola Bavel mipnei shekedusha rishona kitshel l'shaita v'lo kitshel la'asid lavo. That there were many places that Yehoshua conquered with the people who came from Mitzrayim. He conquered a territory that is much larger than the territory that was eventually retaken by the Jewish people during Bayit Sheni. And that original Kedusha of those territories was only temporary. Once we were exiled from our land, the Kedusha came off of those territories, and v'hinichum kedei sheyismechu aleim aniyim b'shvius, and they let those places not be re-sanctified when they came back for the second temple, because they recognized that because we're in a lower madrega, we cannot be so self-sufficient during the Shemitah year as to assume that all of our needs will be taken care of, all of our food needs will be taken care of during Shemitah, and therefore we need surrounding territories around Eretz Yisrael from which we can draw sustenance during the Shemitah year to provide for the poor. So this was already known. Moshe Rabbeinu already foretold this and passed it down from generation to generation. So therefore, he chastised his Talmud Rabbi Yossi. You who were so glowing in your admiration of the Chiddush and the Beis Medrash, if you would have stuck with me and learned from me, you would have realized that this is not such a big deal. So, and then of course Rabbi Yossi is holding his eyeballs while this is all going on. So this is a terrible thing. So Tana la'achar shenis yash v'daita omar yihiratzon shiachsru eine Yossi l'mekomon v'chazru. The Brisa concludes the story and says that finally Rabbi Eliezer calmed down and he prayed that Rabbi Yossi's eyeballs should be restored to his face, and kachava, and they went back into his sockets and his eyesight was restored. Tanu Rabbana. The Brisa now tells us. So obviously, there's a lot of profundity to this story that we cannot plumb at this time. But it's just an important principle that the Gemara is teaching us, is don't be so prideful about, wow, I got an amazing chiddush, you're not going to believe it. And like sometimes people, sometimes people come to me and tell me what they think is the most amazing thing they've heard in their life. So I go along with it because, yeah, that's amazing. Wow, I can't believe it. And, so for you, it's great, fantastic.
So but I told you yesterday?
Right, Tana Rabbanan. Eizehu shota hayotze yichidi balayla v'alon beveis hakvaros av'hamakares ksuso. So now the Brisa goes back to our halachic discussion of the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that one of the people that's pater from aliyah l'regel is a person who's a shaita. Now, who's mentally unsound. So what is the definition? What are the symptoms of being a shaita? So the Brisa says there are 3 symptoms. Walking outside at night alone, which a normal person wouldn't do, sleeping in the cemetery, and the third thing is tearing your clothing. So Itmar Rav Huna Amar Achu Kulan Bevasecha. So Rav Huna says that a person has to display all 3 symptoms in order to be considered a shota, to be pater from mitzvahs. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Afilu Be'echas Mehen. So Rabbi Yochanan says, I disagree. I hold that even if he displays only one of these symptoms, then that's enough to define him as a shaita. So the Gemara says, we have to clarify this. Heichi dami, ida avid lehu derech shtus, afilu b'chadanami. If he's acting like a crazy man when he does these things, So all he has to do is just do one of these things. In other words, if a guy is walking down the street pushing a shopping cart with garbage in it, and he starts drooling, and then he goes and he sleeps in the cemetery, that's probably all you need as an indication that he's crazy. But on the other hand, if there's a reasonable explanation that he tells you in his three-piece suit, I'm going to sleep in the cemetery tonight because my wife kicked me out of the house. So then, if he sounds rational, right? So then obviously, even if he does all three things, but he has a reasonable explanation for these three things, then that's not enough to consider him a shaita. So 1, 3, what difference does it make? You have to look at the circumstantial evidence. So la'olam teka'avid lahu derech shtus. So really, the Gemara says, really, we're talking about a guy who is acting weirdly. He's acting like an insane person, but if he only displays one of those behaviors, that's not enough. Because v'halanda ve'sakvaros emer kadesha tashra alav ruach tumahu deka'avid. Because maybe a person who goes to sleep in the cemetery, and we can't tell there's anything else weird about him other than he's just behaving a little bit strangely, but that's not enough to define him as a shaita. Because maybe there's a wisdom to his craziness, in that he's going to do this because he knows that there's a ruach tumah, there are evil spirits, there's the occult, black magic, and maybe he hopes to garner certain magical powers by sleeping in the cemetery. And a person who walks outside alone at night, even though that's erratic behavior, but if that's alone what it is, maybe the guy is just very hot and he needs some fresh air. So that could happen. Sometimes you get such like hot flashes or whatever it is, you need to get outside, right? And And the third one is if a person tears his clothes all of a sudden spontaneously for no reason, that doesn't automatically mean he's a shaita. Maybe the reason why he's doing it is because he had this very vivid image that came into his mind, and like it shocked him, and all of a sudden he just pulled his clothes. Sometimes you do things without realizing them because you have this daydream and it's so vivid that you don't realize what you're doing. Doesn't mean you're crazy. It just means you have a very vivid imagination. So therefore the Gemara says, Kaven da'avdinu lekulhu avelu kimi shenagach shor chamor v'gamal v'nasamud lekol. But once you display all three symptoms, then that's analogous to an animal that already gores three different kinds of animals. Then you've already displayed that you're a goring animal, you're a dangerous animal. In the similar way, if you do three erratic behaviors in rapid succession, it seems like, then you're already displaying that, boy, there's something wrong with this guy. And then we can determine that he's a shaita. And that's why Rav Huna says that you have to do them all in order to be deemed as a shaita. So Amar Rav Papa, so Rav Papa says it's too bad Rav Huna never heard the following brisa, because if he had, he would have recanted. Because the brisa says that the definition of a shaita is a guy who destroys anything that's handed to him. You give him a bottle, and you say, here, hold this bottle of soda. And what does he do? He throws it on the ground and shatters it to smithereens. That's a sign that the guy's a shaita, because a normal person wouldn't behave that way. So what do you see from this brisa? So you see that even displaying one behavior is enough to define you as a shota. So it's contrary to Rav Huna, who says you need to display three different kinds of erratic behavior. So ibaya lahu ki hava hadar beit mimekareach susuhu dahava hadar beit dedum yalaha odimu mikulu hava hadar. So the question now that is raised by the Gemara is, when Rav Papa says that if Rav Huna had seen this brisa, he would have recanted, is that only he would have recanted from the display of one behavior, meaning that if a person tears his clothing, which is tantamount to that destructive behavior of throwing the bottle on the ground, is that the only case where Rav Huna would have said that, yes, I acknowledge that if you do just that, that alone is enough to define you as a shota? Or would he have said that any one of the three aforementioned is enough to define you as a shota? So even if you just sleep in the cemetery, that's enough to define you as a shota. Or the other side is, as we just mentioned, maybe only when you do something destructive, like breaking a bottle or tearing your clothes, that alone is enough to define you as a shota. So the Gemara says, Teiku, we're not sure what Rav Papa means when he says that Rav Huna would have recanted. We're not sure if he means he would have recanted completely or would have only recanted partially regarding the tearing of clothing. Have a wonderful day.